The darkness of the conclave hall grew thick, a suffocating shroud that pressed against the cold marble walls. Hunger gnawed at the cardinals like a wolf, and fear whispered in every shadow. But now, a new terror gripped them, the silent, unseen death of poison. A death that could strike at any moment. A death that left no warning, only the pale, twisted faces of the dying. Fieschi stood in the flickering torchlight, his face gaunt, his silver hair damp with sweat. Around him the other cardinals huddled in small, frightened groups, their whispers sharp with fear. "Who is it?" one muttered, his eyes darting to the shadows. "Who is the murderer?" "Is it one of us?" another croaked, his voice cracking. "Or is it the guards? Do they slip poison in when we sleep?" Fieschi's voice rose, calm but firm. "This madness must end. We are not enemies. We are brothers of the church, men chosen to guide the faithful. If we turn on each other, then we are already lost." But his words fell on deaf ears. The cardinals were no longer holy men. They were prisoners, men driven to madness by hunger, by thirst, by fear. A figure staggered forward, his robes stained with sweat, his eyes wild. "You speak of faith, Fieschi?" he snarled, his voice a broken growl. "Faith did not save Giovanni. Faith did not save Riccardo. Faith is a lie." Fieschi stepped back, his heart pounding. "Calm yourself, brother. We must remain strong. We must—" "Strong?" The figure laughed, a bitter, ragged sound. "There is no strength here, only death. We are rats in a trap." His voice rose to a scream, his hands clawing at his own face. "And the poison will take us all. All!" A crash echoed through the hall as he fell, his body writhing on the cold marble. The other cardinals recoiled, their faces pale, their eyes wide with terror. "He's gone mad," one whispered. "The hunger has broken him." But Fieschi saw the truth. The man's lips were blue, his eyes bulging, his breath a faint, rasping gasp. Poison. Again. Somewhere in the darkness, death lurked, hidden in the cup, in the bread, in the very air they breathed. "Who is doing this?" Cardinal Rainier demanded, his voice fierce. "Who dares murder the princes of the church?" But even as he spoke, another figure slumped forward, his voice a faint, desperate whisper. "Water! I need water!" His hand reached out, trembling, and then he collapsed, his fingers clawing at the stone. Panic surged. The cardinals scattered, their whispers turning to shouts. "Don't drink the water!" one screamed. "It's poisoned!" "No, it's the bread! The bread is cursed!" another cried, slapping a crust from his own hand. "We are cursed!" a voice wailed. "God has abandoned us!" "Silence!" Fieschi's voice was a roar, fierce and desperate. "God has not abandoned us, but we must have faith! We must—" "Faith!" A figure stepped forward, his face a shadow, his voice cold. "You think faith will save us, Fieschi? Faith is a lie. This is a place of death." Fieschi's gaze locked on the figure, his heart pounding. "Who are you to speak such words? A cardinal or a murderer?" The figure's lips curled into a thin, cruel smile. "A murderer? No, Fieschi. I am a survivor. A man who knows that in this darkness only one law remains, the law of the strong." A murmur swept through the gathered cardinals, fear and suspicion mingling. "He knows. He knows who it is," one whispered. "He is the one, the poisoner." "Me?" The figure laughed, his eyes cold. "If I were the poisoner, you would all be dead." His gaze swept over them, his voice a mocking whisper. "But perhaps I should be." Fieschi's fists clenched. "Enough! We are not beasts. We are not murderers. We are the church." "The church?" the figure sneered. "This is no church. This is a tomb, and we are the bones that will rot here." But even as his voice echoed through the hall, the door thundered once more. Orsini's voice boomed, cold and cruel. "Have you chosen? Or must we leave you to die?" Fieschi staggered forward, his voice a desperate cry. "We cannot choose, Orsini! We are dying! We are—" "Then die!" Orsini's voice cut him off. "Better you die than the church remain leaderless. Better your bones turn to dust than Rome suffer without a pope." Fieschi's shoulders slumped. Around him the cardinals whispered, their eyes wild, their faces gaunt. This was not a conclave. It was a slaughter carried out in the name of faith. But even in the darkness, even in the madness, a spark of defiance burned within him. "Brothers," he whispered, his voice hoarse but fierce, "we cannot let this be our end. We cannot die as prisoners, as cowards. We must stand. We must fight." "Fight?" One laughed, his voice a broken wail. "Fight against shadows, against poison, against death." "No," Fieschi whispered, his gaze fierce. "Fight against fear, fight against despair, fight against the darkness within." But even as he spoke, another cardinal screamed, clutching his chest, his eyes bulging. "Help me, please!" he wailed, his body thrashing, his voice a thin, ragged cry. Fieschi lunged forward, but the man's body stiffened, his final breath a faint, trembling gasp. Another dead. Another life taken in the darkness. And in the shadows, a figure watched, his lips curled in a cruel smile. A shadow that moved without sound, a shadow whose hands were stained not with blood, but with poison. Fieschi fell to his knees, his voice a trembling prayer. "God, if you are there, if you hear us, show us your mercy, save us from this hell." But the shadows whispered in reply, the shadows that had become their prison, the shadows that whispered of death. The darkness of the conclave was no longer just a shadow. It was a living, breathing monster. Hunger was a constant ache, thirst a burning agony. But it was fear that ruled them now. Fear of the poison, fear of the whispering shadows, fear of the cold marble floor where so many had fallen, their final breaths marked by silent agony. The grand hall, once a place of holy prayer, was now a tomb. Fieschi leaned against a pillar, his breathing shallow, his fingers trembling. Around him, the remaining cardinals huddled in terrified clusters, their faces pale, their eyes sunken. Once, they had worn the crimson robes of princes of the church. Now those robes were stained with sweat, with grime, with the marks of their suffering. A place meant to be a beacon of faith had become a place of death. "We are dying," whispered Cardinal Rainier, his voice a thin, shaking breath. "One by one, we are dying." "Then choose!" Orsini's voice thundered from beyond the barred doors. "Choose a pope, and this suffering ends." "Choose?" One of the cardinals laughed, a bitter, ragged sound. "Choose who will die next. Choose which of us will be crowned in a tomb." But even as they argued, even as fear twisted their words, a new whisper spread among them, a whisper of blame. "It is him," one hissed, his bony finger pointing at a shadowed figure. "He is the poisoner. He is the murderer." "No, I swear it is not me," the accused wailed, stumbling back. I am innocent, I swear." "Innocent?" another voice snarled. "Who among us is innocent? We are wolves pretending to be shepherds." The conclave had become a frenzy. Men who had once spoken of faith now clawed at each other, their whispers sharp as daggers. Fieschi's voice rose, desperate and fierce. "Stop this madness! We are dying because we are divided, because we have forgotten who we are." "Who we are!" one shouted, his eyes wild. "We are prisoners, dead men waiting for the grave." "We are the church!" Fieschi shouted, his voice a thunderous roar. "We are the guardians of the faith. If we die here, let it be as men of God, not as beasts." But even as his voice echoed through the darkness, another figure slumped against the wall, his body twitching, his lips turning blue. Poison. Again. The invisible hand of death striking without warning, without mercy. A figure staggered forward, his face pale, his voice a desperate whisper. "Enough! I will not die in the darkness!" His hands clawed at the locked door, his fists pounding against the iron. "Let me out! Let me out!" "Choose a pope!" Orsini's voice thundered, cold and unyielding. "Or die in the darkness!" But even as Orsini's voice echoed, another voice rose. A whisper, cold and cruel. "There is no escape, only death." Fieschi's gaze darted to the shadows, his heart pounding. Who said that? But the darkness was silent. Only the faint, ragged breathing of the dying, the whispers of the terrified. Somewhere in this cursed hall, a murderer lurked. A hand that poured poison, a shadow that killed without a sound. "Who are you?" Fieschi whispered, his voice trembling. "Why do you do this?" A faint laugh seemed to echo through the darkness. "Why? Because faith is a lie. Because you are all sinners, hiding behind holy robes, and in this darkness your sins have found you." "No!" Fieschi shouted, his voice a desperate cry. "We are not sinners. We are men of God. We are—" "Men of God," the voice mocked. "Men who plot, who bribe, who whisper of kings and thrones while the faithful suffer. You are not men of God. You are wolves, and wolves must die." The whispers turned to screams. "He is here! The poisoner! Find him!" "Show yourself, coward!" Rainier roared, his trembling hands grasping a silver crucifix. "Show yourself, murderer!" But the darkness answered only with silence. Fieschi's gaze swept over the terrified faces, the dying men, the shadows that seemed to pulse with malice. This was not a conclave. It was a tomb where the living devoured each other, where faith had turned to fear, where men who spoke of God had become monsters. But even in the darkness, even in the madness, a spark of defiance flared within him. "If we are to die," he whispered, his voice fierce, "then let it be as men of faith. Let it be as men who sought the light, not the darkness." "You think faith will save you?" The voice whispered, a cold breath against his ear. "Faith cannot protect you. Faith cannot stop death." But Fieschi's voice rose, strong and clear. "Faith is the light in the darkness. Faith is the voice that defies fear. And even here, in this place of shadows, I will not abandon it." A cold, mocking laugh echoed through the hall. "Then die in your faith, Fieschi. Die like the fool you are." Silence. Only the darkness, the faint, ragged breathing of the cardinals, the flicker of dying torches. But Fieschi's voice did not waver. "Brothers," he whispered, his gaze sweeping over the pale, terrified faces. "We cannot escape this darkness, but we can choose how we face it." "Choose?" Rainier whispered, his voice a faint gasp. "Choose what?" "Choose to stand together. Choose to be more than shadows. Choose to pray. If death takes us, let it find us in prayer." His words seemed a thin, fragile light, but in the darkness even the faintest light is a beacon. One by one the cardinals fell to their knees, their voices weak but rising. "Our Father, who art in heaven." The darkness pressed close, the cold air thick with fear. But Fieschi's voice did not falter. "Hallowed be thy name." The whispers in the shadows seemed to retreat, the cold, mocking voice fading. But Fieschi knew it was still there, lurking, waiting. But in this moment, the light of faith shone. "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done." One by one, the cardinals prayed, their voices thin but steady, a circle of faith in a place of death. and even the poisoner, hidden in the shadows, seemed to falter. But this was not the end. Darkness still waited. Death still whispered. And as the prayers rose, a faint, mocking laugh echoed from the shadows. "Pray, Fieschi, pray, but death is already here." The darkness of the conclave was absolute. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, fear, and death. The grand hall, meant to be a place of holy decision, had become a chamber of suffering, a place where faith was a flickering candle and death was a shadow that crept ever closer. But even in the suffocating gloom, Fieschi's voice did not falter. "Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us." His voice was a thin, trembling whisper, but it was a prayer that rose above the despair, a whisper of light in the crushing dark. But then a cold laugh echoed through the hall, sharp and mocking. "Forgiveness?" the voice whispered, its tone dripping with contempt. "What forgiveness is there for men who betray their own faith, who claw at each other like beasts?" "Show yourself!" Rainier roared, his hands gripping the silver crucifix so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Coward! Murderer! Show yourself!" The laughter faded, but the darkness remained. The cardinals huddled closer, their faces pale, their eyes wide with terror. Another figure slumped to the floor, his voice a faint, desperate gasp. "Water! Please!" Fieschi knelt beside the dying man, his own hands trembling. "Hold on, brother. Hold on." But the man's eyes glazed over, his final breath a thin, silent whisper. Poison. Again. Death, silent and invisible, creeping through the conclave like a plague. Fieschi stood, his voice a fierce cry. "Brothers, we cannot fight each other. We cannot let fear rule us. We are the Church." "The Church!" a voice sneered. "The Church is a prison. The Church is a lie." Fieschi's gaze swept over the shadows. "You call faith a lie? Then why do you hide? If you are so righteous, so powerful, show yourself." But the darkness only whispered. "Faith cannot save you, Fieschi. Faith cannot protect you from death." "Perhaps not," Fieschi whispered, his voice calm but strong. "But faith can give us courage. Faith can give us hope." "Hope?" The voice laughed, cold and cruel. "Hope is a dream, and dreams die here." But even as the voice mocked, even as death crept closer, Fieschi turned to the huddled cardinals. "Brothers, we must choose. Not a pope for the emperor, not a puppet for the nobles, but a shepherd for the faithful. A man who will protect the Church, who will stand against the darkness." "Choose?" Rainier whispered, his voice trembling. "But who?" Silence. The cardinals stared at one another, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. Each one knew the truth. They were divided, broken. Each man saw enemies in every shadow, poison in every cup. But then Fieschi's voice rose, clear and strong. "Brothers, I do not ask you to choose me. I do not seek the throne of St. Peter, but I ask you to choose a man of faith, a man who will defend the Church, not betray it." The darkness seemed to shift, the cold voice a faint whisper. "You are fools. You will all die." But the cardinals looked to Fieschi, their fear fading, a spark of hope in their eyes. Rainier stepped forward, his voice a trembling whisper. I choose Sinibaldo Fieschi, a man of faith." "And I," whispered another, his bony hand gripping the arm of a dying brother. "A man who speaks of light in the darkness." One by one, the cardinals whispered his name. Fieschi's heart pounded, his eyes wide with shock. "Brothers, I am not worthy." But Rainier gripped his shoulder, his voice fierce. "None of us are worthy, Fieschi. But you give us hope." The darkness seemed to swell, the cold voice a whisper of fury. "You cannot escape death. You cannot escape me! But Fieschi stood tall, his voice strong. By the grace of God I accept, not for power, but for the faithful, not for glory, but for the light. A thundering crash echoed against the doors. Orsini's voice boomed. Have you chosen? Rainier's voice rang out, fierce and clear. Yes, we have chosen. Sinibaldo Fieschi is our pope. The doors burst open, light flooded the darkened hall, and the cardinals staggered, their eyes burning against the sudden brilliance. Guards poured in, their swords drawn, their eyes wide with shock. What is this? Orsini demanded, his voice a snarl. You still live? We live, Fieschi whispered, his voice calm but strong. By the grace of God. But even as light swept over the dying cardinals, even as the faithful whispered of a new pope, the darkness of the conclave left a scar that would never heal. For the shadows had revealed the truth, that faith, twisted by fear, could become a weapon, that the holy men of the church could become prisoners of their own ambition. But as the bells of St. Peter's Basilica rang out, as the faithful knelt in prayer, Fieschi stood before them, his voice a calm, steady prayer. Lord, forgive us, guide us, let your light shine, even in the darkest shadows. And in the centuries that followed, the conclave of 1241 became a legend, a story of suffering, of betrayal, of faith that flickered but did not die. A story of men who had been trapped by fear, but who found a light in the darkness. A story of a pope who rose not through ambition, but through courage. This was the blood-soaked conclave of 1241, a tale of faith, of darkness, and of a light that refused to be extinguished. If you found this story powerful, if it opened your eyes to the secrets of history, please give this video a like, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to Uncle Luke Tells History. Because history is not just about kings and battles, it's about the truths we must never forget.